Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyric Podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, and mangas. I'm your host, the soon-to-be-known as Comic Stan, and with me, as always, is my sometimes cheerful, sometimes jeerful co-host. It's Jamie.
I like that one. That's good.
So it turns out jeerful, not a word.
Well, we're coining it, man.
I think it should be coined. It sounds quite cromulent, doesn't
I was about to make that joke. It sounds like a perfectly cromulent word to me.
And one day it'll be in the dictionary with our name, our faces next to it. People will be like, oh, those must have been a couple of arseholes. Like, no, we coined the phrase. We're not like the embodiment of jeerfulness.
Knowing who I am and my personality and my love of language, it's not inconceivable that I would at some point in my life end up coining a word. I don't know that I want to blow my load on cheerful. Jeerful.
I was going to say, cheerful's the good one.
Yeah, and I'm a generally cheerful, affable chap, aren't I?
Yes, but we also have our jeerful moments, and that's why it should be a word, because it works in that context, doesn't it?
Although a jeer is like, when you're jeering somebody, it's like you're kind of goading them or heckling them.
Yeah. So jeerful. So like the way I imagine it was, if you went into work, like what's the scenario if you went to work, so I was like, oh, you're cheerful today. So it's like you're happy, you're smiling, or whatever. So if someone comes like, bloody hell, you're jeerful today, and it's like you're just telling people to fuck off, and you're like, oh, get away from me. Kind of.
I mean, that's how I approached work every day, Ryan.
And that's why sometimes cheerful, sometimes jeerful, like everyone. And welcome to what will at the time of release be the first podcast of 2024.
But it's our last recording of 2023. Our final recording of our first full year of doing this, Ryan.
Fullish, February-ish, kind of. We were working on it before then, but release-wise was from February.
Yeah,
but
I suppose.
Basically a full year, basically.
But it's our first year.
Yep. And as I said, we're crossing the threshold of recording in the end of 2023, releasing in 2024.
Whole new world, baby.
Hopefully everyone enjoyed the Christmas special, which came out on Christmas Day. I mean, how many other podcasts are releasing podcast episodes on Christmas Day?
And
turns out a few. Quite a few, actually.
I had feedback from a listener who listened to it on Christmas Day.
Yep.
He was on his way home, driving home from his family Christmas, and he popped it on, and he had some notes.
The download numbers were surprisingly high for Christmas Day,
right?
which made me happy. It also made me wonder, and this will be a behind-the-scenes thing, we'll go into more detail in longer term, but is it something we do every Christmas Day? Because like this one was a coincidence. We released on Mondays, Monday was Christmas.
Yeah.
But also, we could just like earlier in advance do a Christmas episode.
I think we knock a Christmas special out. In 2024, we knock a Christmas and New Year's Day special out.
Well, the New Year's special should be the Cheers and Jeers then, because we can do that whenever. It depends, as long as there's no like big tie-ins we want to do around the time, because sometimes films come out on Christmas Day for some reason. Like America, they go to the cinema on Christmas Day, which is weird.
It's what Jewish people do.
Well,
so it's a
lot of Christians do as well, apparently.
Yeah, but traditionally, like because obviously on Christmas Day in America, way back when, everything's shut. The only things that were still open were movie theaters and Chinese restaurants. So on Christmas Day, because it was the only thing they could do that was like vaguely normal, Jewish people would go and get Chinese food and watch a movie. It's like a huge tradition over there.
I think enough like non-Jewish people were also doing it to the point where studios were like, let's get the big Christmas Day release schedule, which I think at this point might have been Aquaman 2 and no one cared about. I think the idea that the world, like at least the Western world, shuts for Christmas is kind of anachronistic now. Like I needed a vape on Christmas morning and I went to the Jet Garage and I got a vape on the way to my family Christmas, and there were people, like I had to drive through Norwich City Centre to do so. And there were people like doing their things, walking about together. Like the city centre didn't look closed in the way it would have done had I done that in 1993 as opposed to 2023. I think, petrol stations have always been like we will be open because someone will desperately need petrol or diesel on this day. Gas for Americans. And I think that they were just like, we need to be open because we're going to make some money. It's capitalism. And what is more Christmassy these days than just pure unadulterated capitalism?
It's very true.
And speaking of capitalism, we've done a lot of episodes of our podcast. And that's why, as you'll see from the title, this is our Cheers and Jeers of the year. So it's a little bit of...
For those of you listening to the podcast as opposed to watching it, my cat, who is covered in flea treatment, is just harassing Ryan.
Basically climbed up my front to give me a boop on the nose, as they call it.
But she can't at the moment because she's covered in poison.
Chemical poisons to the fleas, which is what we want. It's like a Starship Troopers kind of scenario. We're just chemical killing the insects kind of thing.
Yeah, she doesn't have fleas anymore.
I know,
that's why
this
we're
is preventive, yes.
This is preventative flea treatment.
So cheers and jeers, best and worst of the year. We're not doing too many worsts because I don't want the negativity.
But we're doing the middest, which I'm really excited about. The most average.
Well, we're going to be, so we've got categories and we're going to be kind of rating the smaller there's some large categories, and wait to look at them because I'll wait till after we do the first one if you can.
Yeah.
Because the first one I think is good. So as I said, we're just covering all, and we've got some categories and we're just kind of going over what we did. Looking towards the end of the ones released in 2023, but also back just on the episodes in general, how we felt about stuff as it happened.
I think this is a wonderful time for us to reflect on air before we start. How do you feel about the stuff we've read this year? I think we've read some good shit.
We did a lot more modern stuff than I realised when I kind of did the list, and I'm proud of that because I want to be kind of with the times and what's happening as it happens. But also, I feel like we also did some of the most important ones, especially early on, because we didn't know what we were doing early on. So we were like, let's do Why the Last Man. Let's do Mouse for our 5th ever episode.
Yeah.
So
our first episodes were Why the Last Man, that finished publishing in the 2010s.
Yep.
The Pokemon manga from the 90s.
Yep.
Mouse, which came out in the 80s?
Maybe. I think so.
There's some Alan Moore in there that's pretty vintage now. We did
Rogue Sun, which was my attempt to be like, let's do something modern.
We liked Rogue Sun.
Rogue Sun was really good. And League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That was our Alan Moore introduction.
Our Alan Moore moment, baby. He came up within the first 5 minutes of this episode because he had to.
I mean, I've got an Alan Moore quote for the end to end on.
So, for reference, guys, Ryan compiled this list because I think it's fair to say I'm a busier person than you.
I've got admin time, yes.
Yeah, I'm a slightly busier human than Ryan. I've got more on my plate at the moment.
I mean, this takes me up to an almost equal busy level.
Yeah, so Ryan has compiled the categories and the lists, and we've agreed that I'm going to go in blind. So I'm shooting from the hip. It's all jazz on this end. Ryan knows what's going on. I haven't got a fucking clue. That's kind of how this podcast runs anyway.
Yes. And a lot of the earlier stuff is based on our memory of that was pretty good. We're testing our memories, both visual and whatever the one would be for story, and writing and dialogue. But we're pushing the boundaries of what we can remember.
What I'm waiting for is I think there should be an extra secret category at the end, which is the most forgettable comic, and it's the one that neither of us...
we did that one.
Yeah. If there's a comic that neither of us remember doing, they win the award for most forgettable. Now, another thing, humble listener, that I'm yet to explain to Ryan, I think I floated this idea in maybe October, but I've remembered it and I'm committed to it. I found a bloke who mints medals in Norwich, and he does so incredibly affordably.
Yep.
And so I am thinking that, depending on how many of these there are, I might get medals made and try and send them to the relevant people. I don't know if that's just maybe if it's the best artwork, it just goes to the artist, or if I just have a medal made up and I send it to the head office of
Marvel or DC.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. And
you could send it directly. Even those people, you could send them directly to the person.
Yeah, and so they'll have publicists, I suppose, or managers, maybe
with some address or
It's going to be a research project for me. It's probably not going to happen until February, let's be frank here, because ADHD monkey.
But a lot of best ofs don't happen till January, February. As I've explained before, I follow my pro wrestling, and a lot of the biggest end of year things don't happen till mid-January into early February, because they want that cut off time to be right, it's done, now let's look at everything. And tell you what, I looked at there was a best matches of 2023, and there was one that was well, obviously they're going to put this one. It was widely regarded as one of the best of its kind of matches, and they didn't put it in because they recorded it before it happened in November. And I was fuck you, you're not doing a proper one.
I mean, we have floated this till the very end of the year. I think we've done an excellent job. Bear in mind, this is now the nape of the year. This is the gooch of the year between Christmas and New Year. We are both knackered. It's been a long year. I've had the closest thing that I'm going to get to a weekend for a while, and I still don't feel rested. So we're just going to smash this out.
Power through,
see what happens. I'm quite excited for it, though. I've been looking forward to this. Weirdly, I've been looking forward to doing this more than any other episode.
There's something in it. It's why the YouTubers all do the best of for the year. If they cover stuff throughout the year, it's the best of at the end. It's always good some numbers, because mid-year, it's we did this thing, and you're like, I'll watch it, I might not. When it's
Yeah.
like, here's the best of the year, it's like, well, I might have missed something, so I need to go back. Best comics of the year, like, I'll look at other people who have literally read all the comics, which I do not have the time for.
They don't have jobs.
That's what I aspire to be. I hope to one day be the person who's like, look, I read pretty much everything, and here's the best and here's the worst. So that's aspirational for me. But in the meantime, I have to, go to others for that opinion. And then if they've mentioned something that I haven't looked at, then I'm like, I'll give that a read. And that's how I've discovered a lot of like the best ones of the past couple of years. So one day will be that for other people. At this point, it's just what we happen to read that came out this year as well. Yeah. I've made notes on this, how loose I've been with the does it count for 2023? You will see what I mean when we get to it. There's a bit of like, that just gets in, just about Matt, just cuts the rug.
So shall we just jump into the first category then?
Yep. So the first category, I said, we're doing kind of the most weirdest ones first, and then we'll get through to like the bigger, more important ones.
I'm just in the first one.
So the first one, the first category is the best second part of an episode of the podcast, and the nominations are The Return to Scott Pilgrim. So what do you think won?
Well, by default, Ryan...
That would have been better if you'd laughed at me saying it than reading it beforehand.
It's got to be The Return to Scott Pilgrim.
Yes, and
but
you've always
didn't
got
we have a fantastic time?
We did have a good time. It was a weird one because I don't think we had as much to say generally because it was a continuation of all the same art style, your panel layout, that themes, that kind of thing.
I think this is a very clear indication that actually for us returning to stuff probably doesn't work out very well for our format.
I think a second part, we just have to be aware there's going to be a shorter one. And I think at that point we were still holding on to this, like, we've got to hit an hour and a half and like going into 2024, we're going to be less committed to that. I would rather make a shorter amount of good content than trying to stretch out an idea or topic that doesn't cover that time.
Well, you want to aim for a tight hour, don't you?
I'd like to for my own editing time. But I feel like, a second part deserves a shorter time where we just then talk about the context of the writing. Maybe there's some bit, if we get an ending, there's like we can explore that a bit more. And what I found with the Scott Pilgrim one was we were talking like more in detail about the story. Also because that was the furthest part from the film, so that was a bit more interesting to me, whereas in the first half I was like, this part happened in the film and this part happened in the film and you were there and you were there.
Have you watched the series yet?
No, I haven't yet. I haven't got around. Apparently it's very good.
It's really good. The one thing that I had one critique of it, which is that it was fantastic that the whole cast came back, but I didn't necessarily believe Michael Cera's voice coming out of animated Scott Pilgrim's character model, if that made sense.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I think he was a good live action Scott Pilgrim, and I think they were good to get on the back of his ascending fame at the time.
Yeah, totally, because he probably was the only name. That's so not true. There were some huge names in that film, weren't there?
But I think he was the biggest name to be that role.
At the time, yeah.
To be fair, I did see an Age Like Milk on Reddit, and it was literally someone was criticizing the Scott Pilgrim film for not having any names. So we can now say, in retrospect, they're all names because they all became big. But at the time, Chris Evans wasn't Captain America yet. I think he'd done Human Torch, Fantastic Four, but that wasn't
The
huge.
other Culkin was in there, but he wasn't huge at the time.
No, he was literally just Macaulay's brother at that point.
Yeah.
Anna Kendrick, who hadn't done Pitch Perfect yet, and that was her big one.
She's fantastic.
Brandon Routh, who hadn't been Superman yet.
Yeah, totally.
So you've got a lot of people who hadn't hit their big time yet.
But it was, what's his name? The director.
Edgar Wright.
It's Edgar Wright, and one of the things that I certainly think of Edgar Wright is that he makes fantastic casting choices.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, look at the way Baby Driver was cast.
Yep,
so well cast.
One particular age like milk there, but he was a good actor, so you can't say he wasn't.
Yeah, no, he's a tosspot, but he's a fantastic actor.
So easy award to start off with. A practice award, if you will.
Can I announce the second one?
Sure.
The second one is the best Star Wars episode.
Would you like to read all the nominations?
And the nominations are Darth Vader 2015. And the first appearance of Ashoka, Clone Wars 2008, both pretty vintage.
And I think they do require a little bit of debate, because I really enjoyed Ahsoka.
Darth Vader was better.
But the Darth Vader one was better. It was just a really good book. That's the only thing that edges out over Ahsoka. Ahsoka was really interesting and like some good writing there, but it didn't quite hit the heights of like exploring great writing that was exploring this time of a character that we hadn't one of the most prominent characters in Star Wars who we hadn't seen this time period.
Yeah, I just think that Darth Vader comic was more well realized. It was snappier. I think the artwork in the Ashoka comic was better in Clone Wars. I really because I liked the artwork in Clone Wars, didn't I?
Yeah, and it was a bit more, how to describe it? It was a bit looser than the Darth Vader one. Darth Vader was crisper, and it was a bit more like closer to the films. Well, there's a thing, exactly. Darth Vader one was closer to the films and live action. Ahsoka was closer to the Clone Wars animation.
Yeah,
so I
totally.
think that was the biggest difference.
And I think the other thing is that the Darth Vader comic really presented us with Anakin, already Vader, but Vader becoming the powerhouse that he was. We were watching Darth Vader consolidate his power, which we never really get in the films, and I thought it was a fascinating idea. So yeah, it has to take it, doesn't it?
Yep,
it just has to take it.
Easy win, but a good runner-up.
I don't know that it was an easy win. Like, there's not a lot in it. They were both really good.
Should we assign comic literate exclusive Gen Z parlance awards or rankings, shall we say?
Yeah.
So Darth Vader. So to remind the rankings, so the top one is goated. That's like really great, like possibly best of the year, like that kind of level.
Yeah.
Based was like good, like got some good stuff in it. Not necessarily the best, not perfect, but still a lot of good stuff. Mid was like forgettable, not good, not bad. And then cringe is it's just bad.
It's an F. Yeah. It's a fail.
Or D minus. Like, even if it's passing, it's the lowest passing. What's the American term is C's make degrees.
Yeah.
But D is like, they also technically make degrees, but they don't look good. C's look at mid, D's look cringe.
In Australia, they don't have grades to their degree course. You either pass or fail. And the passing grade is like straight down the middle. I think it's either 50 or 60%. And they have an expression over there, which is P's get degrees. It's just like, doesn't matter how well you do, P's get degrees, baby.
Right. As long as it rhymes, that's all that matters. So Darth Vader, I think I would give it a based.
Yeah, it was based. Good. It wasn't goated.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be very few comic books in this that get goat status.
Yeah. And Ahsoka, I'm between based and mid. Like, I'm going to go based. If there were inter-rankings, then Darth Vader would be high-based, and Ahsoka, I think, would be low-based.
Yeah, I don't think it's mid. Like, there was too much interesting stuff going on there for it to be mid.
But not enough to blow me away or, like, remember it excessively. Like, Darth Vader had introduced a new character, which became a big staple of the Star Wars comics in Dr. Aphra. So, one that people are clamoring to bring into the films.
Yeah, totally.
Whereas Clone Wars, like, you could say that for Ahsoka, but Ahsoka, that was because of the Clone Wars animation, not the comic. So that's I think the difference. So next category,
I think we're going to have a discussion about this one.
I think it's an interesting one. It's one that I only thought of when I was looking at the list. I was like, we've got a few of these. We could do this. So not that would stop me anyway. But so this one is the best biographical or non-fiction, interchangeable in some cases, episode. And the categories the nominations are Mouse, Pride of Baghdad, the Remembering John Romita Sr. episode, which has an interesting backstory if you know the lore of the podcast. Brief Comic History of Humankind, and what is an avant-garde exploration of creativity in the creative process. I almost made another fun category, which was which title that Jamie dictated word by word, having to be exactly correct. I'm trying to think what the better term was. Like, what's the opposite of ad-lib or like to improvise? Like, it's really scripted.
Yeah.
Has to be word for word, but...
Oh, yeah, because you changed it and I was like, no, Ryan.
It has to be this way
It has to be exactly as I said it.
And I was like, I don't care enough to challenge you.
So I'm going to be honest with you. There's a couple of these that are based, but there's one of these that is goated.
I would put two as goated, actually.
You shoot first.
Well, I think we're both on the page for Mouse being goated. Mouse is one of the
goated.
best comic books of all time.
Good.
Yeah,
so good.
And this was kind of my argument going back to like why we shouldn't give awards for ones that didn't come out in 2023.
Totally.
Because imagine... Unfortunately, I don't recall his name now, but the writer of Mouse being like, I've got an award for some podcast, the goated or biographical / non-fiction of 2023. Like the most random, like if he just kept getting them every year, it's like, you won again. Like, doesn't matter when it came out. So, Mouse is obviously the best, but I would go ahead and put, I think, Pride of Baghdad up there as well.
I agree with you. I mean, it's hard because when we're talking about John Romita Sr., the episode itself was non-fiction. It was biographical.
Yeah.
But we were talking about a real person in his fictional work, so I kind of feel like that doesn't have a place here. So I feel like really we're talking about Mouse, Pride of Baghdad, A Brief Comic History of Humankind, and What It Is.
Sure.
Now, I think What It Is based. Like, I think all of these are either based or goated, if I'm honest with you. But Mouse is my clear winner. Like, I mean, that was an early episode, so I wouldn't even necessarily recommend listeners go back and listen to it, because we were just learning what we were doing.
Well, here's the thing. So, yeah, are we looking at the comic or the episode?
I think the title. I think we're looking at the title. I think it's a bit self-congratulatory of us to have.
We are so cool and thoughtful for doing Mouse.
Yeah, totally. Like,
props to us.
I mean, you kind of. I feel like a lot of superhero comic fans wouldn't even know what Mouse is.
Yes, I think the thing about Mouse is, if you've ever been in a bookshop that sells comics, it's almost certainly been like a stood up, like, featured comic. Because I think bookstores like that kind of like, bookshops like that, like, well, we do comics, but here's a informational one about a serious topic. So I think they like that. I think it's quite popular in that regard. But again, popular in the sense that people see it and know it, but not have read it, which is different.
It's very literary, isn't it?
Yes.
Let's be frank here.
But I would definitely say it's definitely the best. It's definitely the winner. Mouse is the win of the category.
Yeah.
And yeah, the best of the kind. Brief history of a brief comic. Oh, bloody hell, ruin it. A Brief Comic History of Humankind is not a title I've had to say 3 times because I've cut out the first 2. But also it was one that it felt like a kind of tourist in the comics genre. Like it was like a passing, like, hey, we're just doing a little appearance in the comics and then we're kind of back off to serious books, you know.
I mean, it's an adaptation of a fairly scholarly book.
Yes, exactly. And then what it is, I think, is so out there. I mean, I would describe it as based. I liked what it did, even though if I didn't get like the intended experience from it. I think that like what it is and what it set out to do would put it in base for me because it was just so interesting.
Jarring, didn't you?
Some parts, but then other parts, like the actual story and narration parts, I found really interesting.
Yeah.
So again, based easily just for how good those parts were.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think this is a really interesting category to judge because it's so outside of what we normally do. Hence why there's only a handful. And we're about to get into. I've just seen the next one. But no, I mean, I think in terms of like episodes, if we're talking about, so we've kind of talked about the books. In terms of episodes that I'm proudest of, I think even though Mouse was an early one, I'm really proud of Mouse. I'm really proud of the way that we tackled A Brief History of Humankind.
Yeah, I'm glad we did it. And it's the kind of thing I would like to keep doing occasionally, so we just have at least a couple of ones at the end of the year for this category.
Yeah, there's some of the episodes that I'm proudest of. Even though they weren't, you know, they're not necessarily as successful and people don't like them as much. But no, I think and I think the What It Is episode was for me in my mind, a bit of a turning point for the way that you and I talked about comics.
Yeah.
Because it was something that was so far outside what either of us were used to reading.
Yeah, and it definitely highlighted, like, the techniques used to convey story and more especially meaning through the comic medium. So, again, like, that kind of influenced my reading of comics afterwards, because I was then looking more at, like, how the eyes travel the page and things like that. I mean, we were looking at that before as well, but it definitely added an extra dimension to looking at comics.
I mean, it was the first time we'd looked at a comic that really is fine art.
Yes. I would say we've had some. It completely depends on your definition of fine art. I think we've had ones that have gotten into that territory, but it's completely it's completely subjective. So
yeah.
So do you want to introduce the next category? Oh, do we need to assign levels for all of them?
No, I think just kind of talking around.
That's fine, yeah. For that category especially.
The next one is huge, and this is the meat of the episode. It's the most superhero shenanigans in a comic book. So we've got Rogue Sun, Superman for the Man Who Has Everything, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, Meet the Skrulls.
Which Marvel, I think that counts, even though it wasn't very superhero. It was superhero-ish.
Oh, it was superhero adjacent, wasn't it? Miles Morales Spider-Man, The Flash Flashpoint, The Amazing Spider-Man, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think we should really just be talking about The Last Ronin here.
Fair enough.
Blue Beetle Graduation Day, Human Target, The Boys, Spider-Man One More Day, Invincible, Miss Marvel, the
origin of Kamala Khan
one, and the Marvel Holiday Special. So I think in this category, because we read so much modern stuff, we should discount all the old ones and just talk about sort of 2022, like maybe 2021 onwards.
Well, see, it's interesting there because in terms of superhero shenanigans, like the definite, because if we're looking at like what you have coined essentially on this podcast as superhero shenanigans, Flashpoint is like one of the prime ones as an example of how bad it can be.
That, I mean, you've pulled out what for me is like, in terms of, it's either the best superhero shenanigans or the most cringe superhero comic, depending on what way you choose to look at it.
Well, exactly. And I think especially, because I think you can have good things with superhero shenanigans in them. Like if it's anything can be done well. But I think Flashpoint is a prime example of superhero shenanigans hindering a story because they've just put so much in of this stuff at the detriment of the plot. As you primarily described, it was the story was, oh no, we're in a tough situation. This person has turned up.
I coined a term for it, didn't I? The Deus Ex character.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Which I'm really proud of. So yeah, there's a lot of Deus Ex characters where people just come in and swoop in and save the day. And there's just a lot of deep superhero lore bollocks that you need to wade through to even get anywhere with it. Don't think it's that well written. Don't think it's that well drawn.
And then to go, I think, in the opposite route of superhero shenanigans, I mean, we've got a couple. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, I think was used shenanigans well.
Goated.
Yeah.
Totally goated. Such a great comic book. Such a great idea. Oh, yeah, I fucking adore that book. I think it's fantastic.
And then equally Rogue Sun, but for very different reasons, because it started off in its own isolated universe while building with other titles as well. I think Radiant Black is like the core one, which hopefully we'll do at some point.
Yeah.
But Rogue Sun didn't have as many other universes and superheroes and characters to cause shenanigans.
Yeah, and the superhero shenanigans, they were treading on quite well-worn tropes, but they were using them in interesting ways, and they were trying to build a new comic book universe, and they were trying to jumpstart one from the ground, and I really respect that.
It's still going, so we can only assume it must be successful.
Yeah, well, commercially successful enough that they're still printing them, right?
Yep.
And so yeah, I think I mean, I don't think Rogue Sun's based, but I don't think it's dull enough to be mid. I think it's like,
I'd say, but I'd go based, but because I like a superhero story and it was a good one, so for me, I'd say based.
I mean, for me, I suppose it's that fuzzy area between based and mid, because it was not mid. It was pretty good, solid writing, enjoyable story, but it's not.
I think that's when you have to default to with any category. If you look at if you feel it's between two, and then you go, well, it can't be this. It has to be the other one.
It's low based.
Yeah,
it's like if we were putting these in, you know, the charts that YouTubers use for things.
Yeah, the S to F rankings.
It would be like low C, like mid, like middle of the pack, maybe kind of towards the bottom of the pack for the based comics that we're going to talk about today.
I'd go hard based, and again, I've explained that it's the subjective difference. I think it's I just enjoyed a superhero comic. Superman for the Man Who Has Everything. A good level of shenanigans. Like, I felt like that was super shenanigans written well, because it was around this main story.
I don't remember it.
It's the Alan Moore it's Superman's dad's a Nazi. Space
Nazi. Because
Nazi.
Here you've said it's released in 2021.
Sorry. Those are all the episode release dates, just so I remembered when we did it in the year. So it's that's the Alan Moore one from the 80s.
Right, okay, yeah. I mean, that was great.
Yeah, and again, shenanigans done well because it's like a mix. It's the superheroes kind of meeting for Superman's birthday, but the main core of the story is Superman in this hallucination of if he'd stayed on Krypton and, you know, what he could have missed and everything. So I think that was shenanigans done well, but, you know, from the 80s, so pinch of salt.
I think there are three here that really hold a special place in my heart, and I don't know which one I would choose to give the award to.
So this one specifically is, again, most superhero shenanigans.
So, because I really liked Human Target, but it was quite light on the shenanigans.
Exactly.
But it was fantastic.
Well, that's going to be released. That's going to be a best of or worst of 2023. So that'll come separately. So if it's low on shenanigans, that it's not as considered at this point. Spider-Man One More Day, very shenanigan-y.
Fucking cringe, man.
But here's the thing. When we actually dissected it, and I think we could talk about it more here because it's the only category it appears in, really.
I warmed up to it, didn't I?
Well, when we broke it down, the story was actually pretty good. It was Spider-Man wrestling with, you know, the effects of his choices on his family and weighing up, and it's just the ending that ruins it spectacularly. So, and that's a different kind of shenanigans. That's retconning shenanigans. So that's a very specific kind of shenanigans where it's like, oh, you remember when this happened? That doesn't matter now. Like,
I suppose in the way it fits into the wider context of Spider-Man comics, it's very shenanigan-y, isn't it?
Yeah. But Invincible, I redefine super shenanigans. Like, it kind of does it in the best way possible.
Great.
Yeah. I would put Invincible as goated, but that's because I've read the whole thing. So that's maybe not as good an indication on like what we read.
His dad turning out to be the bad guy.
Yep.
Goated. In terms of that story twist, like the way they set his dad's character up as being like a loving family man and all of those beautiful interactions with the mum. You know, it was really lovely. And then blam, he's the bad guy. He murders all those people. It's like, it's brutal. It's heart-wrenching. Great storyline, great story twist. Very shenanigan-y.
But it's like, it felt like its own version of shenanigans that were kind of more appropriate, and they didn't like solve problems. They kind of created, they were shenanigans that, you're right. You're so right. Fed into the ongoing story.
Like, I love the bit that really stuck with me from that one is where he sends the son to go fight that alien.
And they just talk it out.
Well, yeah, they talk it out and he realizes he's been fighting the wrong guy, but the dad has just been fighting him every time without talking to him. And it's like, that's such a cool little character thing, and it was so well played out on the page. Like, Invincible is probably better than I maybe even gave it credit for in the episode.
Yep. And again, I'm attributing what later happens to it. So, the only other one I think in terms of shenanigans that needs mentioning, so Miles Morales Spider-Man, that had some shenanigans, but very mid shenanigans.
I can't really remember it.
Again, that might be a point for it.
It was pretty mid.
Yeah. But Amazing Spider-Man.
Oh no, Ryan.
I've got some points afterwards.
Is this the John Romita Jr. one?
Yes.
Oh God, no.
I've got some points later that I'll talk about in the 2023 category, because what I read of it afterwards came out in 2023. So we'll get into that. In terms of what we read, the first 5 issues, it was a bit shenanigan-y, wasn't it?
The other one that I think we need to talk about, fantastic comic, heavy on the shenanigans, Ms. Marvel.
Yes. Yeah. To be fair, the shenanigans that we normally talk about is like, oh, look, that person's here and that person there, whatever. Ms. Marvel, in that first volume, the only other appearances were her own hallucinations.
Yeah,
so they more informed her kind of inner monologue and her inner turmoil, personified by these hallucinations of her heroes in the Avengers.
Yeah, and I don't think either of us really had that, other than the janky art. There was a bit of jank, wasn't there?
Yeah, but I feel like that was stylistic. Like, we've had that discussion in the episode. But...
Yeah, totally. Like, we both came away from that episode with a really, really high opinion of that comic book and everyone involved in it and the character and what it kind of meant for comic books going into, this new kind of age or generation, if you will.
I really liked that she failed in her first attempt at superheroing, and then in her second attempt, she redefined the goals.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so what's a very tropey shenanigan thing is, I've tried to fight the big bad. Oh no, I've lost. But now I've got the power of friendship and I've won.
Yeah.
A la Blue Beetle graduation day.
Yeah.
But in Ms. Marvel, she redefines the goal. She's like, right, just get the hostage out. You're not going to beat anyone. You're just going to outsmart them and just achieve this one specific goal.
Yeah.
And to me, that felt very real. That felt more real. I really liked it on that basis. I think if we just, in terms of most shenanigans, I'm putting forward the Flashpoint.
Yeah, no, it's cringe, and it unfortunately wins the award for worst shenanigans in a comic book that we read in 2023.
And should we just do a quick fire grading of this list?
Yeah, totally.
It might change when we get to it in another category, but here we go. So Rogue Sun, I'm going based. Superman for the man as everything, gotta be based.
Goated, man. That shit is good. And it's Alan Moore. I'm sorry. By virtue of being written by the great Alan Moore, anything that Moore wrote just automatically goated.
All right, I'll give you that. I will concede goated on this point. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, goated, obviously. Gonna have a little bit of comic book news once we've done with the nominations. I hope I remember to do in this. Meet the Skrulls, mid. Yeah. Miles Morales Spider-Man, mid. The specifically 2022 version. Yeah. Flashpoint, cringe.
So cringe.
Amazing Spider-Man, gotta be cringe.
Yeah.
Even though I enjoyed it when I first read it. But it's gotta be cringe. Especially for what happens after. I will not let that go at all.
I mean, based on the conversation that we had about it that is still lying in the archives.
Yes.
Fucking hell.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Last Ronin. I'd say based. I enjoyed it.
That was good.
Blue Beetle Graduation Day. Low mid. Like I'm almost in base. I'm almost in cringe, but
I think because I liked it, I remember liking it.
I had my issues with like my scarab is telling me your scarab is evil. It's like
my brother in Christ.
You have a scarab.
That's the third time that joke has appeared.
It'll be the last of 2023 because it'll be the last we talk about it. Low mid. Human target goated. Easily
so good. Goated.
The Boys. Now I'm gonna go based. I think I would have gone goated when I first read it because it was just like a kind of new thing. Like I didn't read it when it first came out. I read it years after, but it felt like a new thing of like, oh my god, the superheroes all not just bad like villains, but like really shitty people, like irredeemable. But the TV show has contextualized how good it could have been because it's doing it better. So I'm gonna go based on The Boys.
Yeah, I mean, there's some parts of it that are cringe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like there are some elements, the way it deals, particularly the way it deals with homosexuality,
sexual assault.
Yeah, pretty cringe, man. Like I don't think it was well dealt with. I don't think it was elegantly dealt with. Like, you know, sometimes you want to tell a story and it features those things and you just have to get on with it. But there's some elements of it that are cringe. But in terms of the effect that it had on comic books going forward, it's kind of got to be based, doesn't it? Because it's just so highly regarded.
Not just that for me. For me, the thing about Garth Ennis is he is like the edgelord's comic book writer. Like he will put in the most horrific, edgy, for the sake of edgy kind of stuff. But what saves him for me to sign that label wholly is he is really good at writing these relationships at the core of them. So like in The Boys, Huey and Starlight, and Huey and Billy, like their relationships and how they interact and how they're affected by all this stuff going on around them, which is like horrible. Garth Ennis is really good at writing these.
He writes solid characters.
These character relationships at the middle. So yeah, I'm gonna go based.
Didn't he also write
Preacher?
Yeah, which again is goated, like so good.
Yep.
And again, really dark.
Yep, exactly.
So, you know, it's weird that there's some of the darker elements of this I find a bit awkward now.
I read there was a subreddit on the comic book subreddit, and one of it was, what is the edgiest comic book ever written? And one of the consensus answers was a comic called Crossed, and it's written by Garth Ennis. And the plot of Crossed, and you can tell where this is going, but it's like there's a virus that basically, when people get it, they get this red cross on their face, like a rash kind of thing, but it also drives them to do the most evil shit they could possibly do.
Yeah.
So that's like contextualized by whatever this person, whatever you would think is the most evil thing you could do, is what it makes you do. And that obviously relates to like if your loved ones are nearby and stuff like that. So just immediately an edgy topic. But what's interesting is apparently the story is quite good in the center. And he also, at one point, he just stopped writing Crossed, but it kept going with other writers, and one of the writers who stood in to do a couple of issues, Alan Moore.
Really?
And apparently Alan Moore he was really good terms with Garth Ennis, and he gave him the advice, Garth Ennis, of like, write comics that you own. Like, own your own shit. Yeah. Like, Alan Moore gave him that, imparted that wisdom, and Garth Ennis kind of took that going forward once he'd done the major stuff with the other labels.
Yeah.
But yeah, the interesting tidbit. Spider-Man One More Day,
cringe for the man,
even though there's really good stuff in the body of the story, the ending just absolutely sinks it into cringe. Like it just cannot be denied how bad that ending is. Invincible, goated.
I think based.
That's fair, but yeah, as I've said, I'm judging it on other stuff.
Yeah,
and I can't help but bring that to the pages.
But I can't put it up there with like Supergirl.
Yeah, that's fair. I think if you read the whole thing, I do genuinely believe you would put it up there. But I'm not making you change it.
But I've not read it yet.
Exactly.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Ms. Marvel, I'm going to go based. Really enjoyed it.
Good, based. Totally.
Had my issues with it, but based. And
the Marvel Holiday Special.
It's got to be based. Like,
do you think?
At least based. Like, it was a fun read. Like,
yeah, I suppose. I mean, it's somewhat like low based, kind of.
Yeah, I went.
Some of the stories were totally mid. Some of them were a bit cringe, but overall, it was pretty good, right?
Yeah, it was just a fun time. So, yep, that's it. And there was one, I think, just above that you missed. It was a little one above that one. So, just above that. Oh, it's my turn to read it. Anyway, so this one is the best/worst superhero comic of 2023 that we did. So, a small list. It's smaller than I anticipated in terms of superhero stuff. So, of this one, we've got Miles Morales Spider-Man 2022 to 2023, Blue Beetle Graduation Day, similar time frame, and Human Target, which actually ran late 2021 to early 2023. It just scraped by like 1 or 2 issues.
But you had to put it in there because it obviously wins.
It obviously wins. It's goated. Yes.
Fantastic.
As we've said, it is, and you know what, I'm just going to say this news now because I was going to mention it separately. I was going to mention it up top, I forgot, but bit of movie news. So comic books get adapted.
Shit.
So temper your expectations, but this is significant to me. So movie news, comic books get adapted to movies. We know this. Yeah. The DCEU has just finished essentially with Aquaman 2, which kind of contributes to why it's not doing so well. Because people are like, why?
Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa deserved a better superhero and a better run of films.
Well, there's a strong rumor that he's going to be in the new DC. So this is the thing. The DCU currently has ended because they're starting a new one in 2025. And there's strong rumor that he's going to be playing a character called Lobo, who he would be, I think, perfect for. Lobo is like a motorbike riding alien bounty hunter.
I mean, that kind of is Jason Momoa anyway.
And he has like big hair or dreads or whatever version of him. He talks like the big daddy Lobo ain't gonna stand for this, mama, like that kind of talk, which I think Momoa can do. Yeah. So yeah, strong. Like he's like obviously upset about Aquaman, but I think he's probably gonna be in the new one. In the new DCU. So new DCU is helmed by James Gunn, who they pinched from Marvel. Cool. He's doing Superman Legacy is going to kick off, which I think is going to be awesome because James Gunn makes great superhero films. Is
Henry Cavill coming back for that?
No, the new one's been announced.
Who?
He's kind of unknown. Like you wouldn't know, even if I remembered his name, you wouldn't know him. Okay. But that's what you want. You want someone to build into it.
Yeah, but Henry Cavill kind of was that, and he was the perfect Superman.
But he was of that version, the Zack Snyder version. So they want to obviously reboot it. They want a younger Superman so they can start off young and build him up from there.
Yeah.
The news is, so we already knew that James Gunn was a big fan and was going to be incorporating Wonder Woman, Woman of Tomorrow in as a Supergirl film, written by the one and only Tom King.
Yeah.
Apparently, Tom King is going to, strong reported rumor right now, is he's going to be a big part of the DCU going forward.
What, script writing and stuff?
Like his stories being used and having an input. They did that before with Jeff Johns. He was the previous DC. Yeah. Jeff Johns wrote Flashpoint. So might explain the lack.
Yeah, maybe not so good. But Tom
King's awesome. And what I'm really hoping for, like fingers crossed if we can get it, is a Human Target live action with John Hamm as Christopher Chance. Can you imagine?
God.
Older. That's perfectly fine because he's like established and he's experienced by this point. He's got that grey on the sides.
Yeah, a little bit of salt and pepper.
He'd be perfect Christopher Chance.
He has a real presence as well, doesn't he, John Hamm?
That silently contemplating. I mean, he's got that from Mad Men, obviously. So him in Human Target, I think, would be amazing.
I fucking love John Hamm.
If I was Tom King, I'd be like, I will do everything else you want me to do. Can you please just adapt Human Target and put John Hamm in?
Do you know what's wild is that in my head, when I pictured Chris Chance speaking, it was John Hamm's voice anyway.
Yep.
Like, perfect. I think we may have even mentioned Mad Men in the episode.
Can you imagine? Especially with John Hamm's comedic chops as well. Like,
He's funny.
He wouldn't be exercising as much, but I think he'd be really good as a Christopher Chance Human Target in a suit talking to Booster Gold in the what was it? What the bagels, Booster's Bagels.
Yeah.
And so he wouldn't be overtly funny, but I think he'd have that comedic timing to react to like a overtly funny Booster Gold.
Totally, yeah, he'd be fantastic at it.
And James Gunn likes Booster Gold as well, so I think he's probably going to have him in as well.
Sick. That's really cool.
Yeah, so great news. Like the DCU looks good coming in, so and it'll give us reasons to do tie-ins.
So
the next category.
Well, we didn't actually talk about Human Target, obviously the best.
Yeah, and to be fair, we did those in the last one. Miles Morales and Blue Beetle, I think, were both mid.
Yeah,
we both ranked
out of them, there's a clear bottom here, which is Blue Beetle.
Yeah. For me, it's got to be.
Even though the Miles Morales story wasn't the best Miles Morales story I've ever read, the character being as cool as he is kind of bumps all Miles Morales stories for me are just a little bit elevated.
Yeah. Whereas, unfortunately, and I think it's as correctly pronounced, but we were doing it incorrectly on the episode, Hamey or Hamey, I think is how people refer to him. We said Jamie on the episode, but I think it's Hamey or Hamey.
Oh, right. It's just because it's spelt the same way as mine.
Yeah, exactly. And we're Western idiots, so.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Blue Beetle Graduation Day, again, I had too many issues with it to give it anything more than the bottom rank of this category.
No.
So this limited,
very limited. This next one's quite interesting. The best and worst horror episodes.
Yep. And there was a lot more I realized outside of our Spooktober specials.
Yeah. Well, we did a whole month of spooky season, but we did a few. So Ice Cream Man, Something's Killing the Children, Nice House on the Lake.
I was debating whether to include that one or not.
Nice House on the Lake. I think it fits.
It absolutely has horror elements.
It's kind of more of an existential horror, isn't it?
Yes, but it does have like apparition type characters and things like that. So yeah,
Maniac of New York, The Neighbors.
So we did Harrower with the Rick and Morty episode. So that's mainly looking at Harrower as an entry. Spider-Man One More Day.
Yeah, I'm not even putting that in. And Five Nights at Freddy's: The Silver Eyes. So there's an obvious winner here.
Yep, I think. In terms of quality of these comics we've listed, it's got to be Nice House on the Lake.
Yeah, fantastic comic.
But is there an argument for like, did another comic do better horror specifically?
Well, I think the best horror title there is Maniac of New York.
Yep. I think Something's Killing the Children was a really good one for me. I thought it was a really inventive premise, and I think they did it in a really good way.
I don't know that was necessarily a horror or an action thriller.
Action horror, it could be, and I think that kind of still passes it. I mean, it's monsters killing people. I mean, that sounds like quintessential horror at the end of the day, doesn't it? Even though I know what you mean. It had an action-esque style of how the story played out and everything, and fighting and beating the monsters. In terms of what nailed the horror tropes the most, though, surely it has to be Maniac. Yeah, Maniac was the quintessential slasher horror. And I think, other than Nice House on the Lake, which is probably the best title here for me, is, if we're discounting that because it's not quite over the line of what we would call a horror. Yeah, it was considerable, but I think within this specific within the specific category, I think Maniac does horror a bit better than Nice House on the Lake. I think it clinches it, doesn't it? Yeah, just about. Because, again, Nice House on the Lake was so good. Nice House on the Lake, I would put in goated. Yes. Maniac of New York, I would say, is based. But in terms of better than the other. Yeah, but one was more of a classic horror. I mean, it was a straight up slasher fic, wasn't it? Yeah, exactly. Ice Cream Man deserves a mention of the anthology horror type. I mean, I suppose it was the first anthology we really did, wasn't it? Yes, and we weren't quite as sure how to tackle it because it didn't have as many like running themes or stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I did a bit of a spot check on the episodes a few weeks ago where I listened to maybe half an hour, 20 minutes of a bunch of them. And I remember going back and being like, I don't know that we necessarily did that comic justice by the way that we reviewed it, because again, we were quite inexperienced. This was like last summer, wasn't it? Yeah, exactly. Maybe even before then. Early this year, I think, like spring this year, I think. Yeah, so we'd only been doing this for a few months. Yeah. But again, the comic itself was really enjoyable. It was enjoyable, but our tastes do both gear towards like running narratives and stories that we can get our teeth into, which it had this kind of background narrative about like the origins and what the Ice Cream Man character is, and the cowboy, which was like the protagonist to his antagonist, but was barely in most stories. So it was interesting. Like it's in terms of individual ranking, I'd definitely put Ice Cream Man as based. Oh, 100%. Like it's definitely not mid. It was really interesting to read. Yeah, but the winner of this definitely has to be Maniac of New York for the reasons you said. The story, I think, continues to get good in Maniac. That does go into 2023, so it could have been included in that. But even though it's the same kind of style and writing, I thought we didn't read those ones. They come out in separate volumes, like they come out like 5 issues at a time, and then you don't get any for months. So we did we've only included what we've covered, which was not in 2023, but a great horror nonetheless. So Maniac of New York, based again, as you said. Something's Killing the Children, I'd say based. I wouldn't quite go into goated. Like no way. Yeah, so high base for me for Something's Killing the Children. The Neighbors, totally mid. I definitely mid. Yeah, it was a kind of swing and a miss. Like you could tell what it was going for was a bit lofty. Thinking back to the episode, I remember us both being like, it's okay. Like we didn't hate it, did we? There were elements that were good, but they were fewer and further in between. Yeah, it was a bit mid. The Rick and Morty that we read, it's cringe. I know it gets better. Yeah, but what we read was cringe. Yes. Yeah, it was just it was just. Or was it kind of more mid? Like it was kind of forgettable. Like I don't think it did much bad. I think we had higher expectations.
Yeah, I suppose there was nothing wrong with it. So yeah, it probably is a bit just more mid, isn't it?
Yeah, but then when you're talking about like one of the most popular TV shows currently going, a comic tie-in you would think would have some kind of expectations that it didn't meet. So I think that's why it feels worse than it is.
I'm not throwing Spider-Man in there because the horror element was just how bad it was. And we talked about it.
Yeah.
And then Five Nights at Freddy's, totally fucking cringe.
Cringe, yes. That was not good. I did see the Five Nights at Freddy film, and you can tell that it's this...
Did you actually watch it?
I watched it,
Was it any good?
Parts of it were all right, but so here's the biggest problem with it for me, and I think a lot of people had as well. You could tell that this guy, Scott Cawthon, who made all the games, or at least had a hand. I think they got a bigger studio, and he was a creative driver in the later ones, even if though he didn't do them all himself.
Maybe just a creative director.
Yes, but he wrote all the books, and this was adapted to, and he wrote the film. And the problem is you can tell by the film that it's already indulging in the larger franchise before it actually delivers a solid film in itself.
Yeah.
What the biggest example of this for me was there's a part where the character who is revealed to be the bad guy from the games, who turns out to be the only character who was introduced earlier in the film, then didn't come back until the very end of the reveal, but was
shocking.
But was played by Matthew Lillard, who did a great job in the performance. I will say
Matthew Lillard.
He was Shaggy in the Scooby-Doo films, and also
he's great.
Yes,
I like that guy.
And for horror elements or like the gore stuff, he was like one of the original killers in Scream franchise. So he brings a bit of that to the performance, which is great. But when he's caught in the suit and the the gears, the spring locks are going, and he's dying like that, he's going. As he's dying, he goes, "I'll be back. I always come back." And it's like, for the franchise, if you know the entire franchise, that's appropriate.
Yeah.
But for a first-off film where this human being is dying for the first time, for him to be like, "Yeah, I'll be back," though, it's like, you don't know that.
The stakes are super high here for you to be saying that.
The horror is meant to be that you come back later and that's really bad, but it's not he doesn't know he's going to come back.
It's a level of foreshadowing that they probably shouldn't be setting up at this point, isn't it?
It was a bit of a building a franchise before you've got the first good film kind of problem.
Yeah, you've not made Iron Man yet, but you're still trying to bootstrap the MCU off of nothing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's worse than DCEU because at least they had Man of Steel first, and that was like a solid film on its own.
I mean,
then even Batman v Superman went franchise heavy.
Even DC, like, even though they didn't have a whole lot to try and build that particular cinematic universe from, it's fucking DC, man. They've got Batman, they've got Superman.
Yeah,
like they already have two of the biggest franchises in comic book history. Five Nights at Freddy's has nothing.
No, and
it just has an old burger joint and some suits. Like, there's nothing there, is there?
And dead kids, obviously.
Oh, loads of dead kids, yeah.
It was running before it was walking.
Whereas the DC just has dead parents.
Whether on Krypton or in an alleyway in Gotham. They're all dead. So, that's the horror one. Did you read the horror ones, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Yes,
Sure.
So, this next category is I thought, an interesting category. Best or worst tie-in / comic adaptations.
Yes.
So this one, it's a bit of a far-reaching concept, but I thought appropriate and like an interesting concept in itself.
Yeah.
So these are comics that were made or about something that was pre-existing.
Yeah.
So it's not so much if it's like a sequel comic, but it's not a comic based on a comic or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's like there was an existing franchise. Here's a comic tie-in or adaptation of a part of the franchise.
I mean, there's some in there that aren't that as well.
Well, let's go through them and so we can kind of get across like what the differences
are. The nominees are.
Yes. We've got Darth Vader 2015, adaptation of obviously the Star Wars franchise. Guards, a Terry Pratchett adaptation.
Yeah.
Barbie, which is a tie-in by the strictest term, I'd say, tie-in to an existing franchise. I've got Ahsoka again from the Clone Wars. We've got the Rick and Morty comic.
Yeah.
Five Nights at Freddy's, as we just talked about. And we've got Doctor Who, Once Upon a Time Lord, which we recently did. So
again, there's a clear winner here, but I resent the fact that we're going to give 2 awards to one comic.
I mean, if it wins it, it wins it. Like, we can't, it's like when the Oscars, like something clean sweeps all the awards. Like, if it's good enough, it's good enough. So, Darth Vader, I think.
Yeah, totally. Like,
it was so good that there were Star Wars comics before that.
Yeah.
And then when they started these ones in 2015, people went, oh, the Star Wars comics are good again. Like, that was like the reaction, like, oh my God, these Star Wars comics are like, because people were kind of crying a bit, like the fan base, that was the period of time where everything pre the films, or anything that wasn't the films before that point became legends.
Yeah.
So that was when it's like, it's not canon, it's a story within the universe. It's not, it might influence what we do later, because that obviously happened with Ahsoka, but it's not canon now. So
I think what's interesting and something that we have to know is that we currently live in a golden age of cinematic Star Wars stuff.
Absolutely.
There's TV, because Disney got hold of it. There's TV shows coming out a couple times a year. We've had a whole new trilogy. I imagine there's another trill in the works. Like, I imagine they're going to keep
probably,
shit out. In 2015, we had the prequels, the sequels, and then all of the books and comic books. And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
And so actually, at the time, 2015, this was kind of the only Star Wars shit that Star Wars fans were getting. And so they needed it to be good because it was the only place they were actually getting Star Wars stories.
The only other thing they had at the time which remained in the canon, like somehow clinged on to like the world, the entire universe disintegrating, and this one piece of content just managed to hold on, was the Clone Wars and Rebels.
Yeah.
So those animations stayed on. I think they were already planning on expanding that, but just because they were so popular. So Star Wars fans had the TV shows,
but they were for kids initially. I mean, they're great. We both love them, don't we? But
yeah, and the comics, you could say, I don't know if you could say they're for the kids or not, but they are at least exploring more of the serious, themes and stuff from the TV show, from the films. A lot of killing and maiming happening in the comics, but then there's a bit of that in the Clone Wars as well. So, but I think,
I mean, there's more maiming than killing in Star Wars. There's an actual term that they have for taking someone's hand off.
Yeah.
There's a very Jedi, old Jedi planet languagey term for it.
Couldn't it be disarming?
No, there's a special name for it.
But disarming already kind of means that.
Yeah, but they have their own name for taking someone's hand off.
Right.
It's like a sacred act that you perform so that you can disarm somebody without killing them. So you don't have to kill somebody.
Probably why it's so common.
Yeah, you can make them an ineffectual Jedi, and it's written in as a technique that has always been used by Jedis.
Right.
It's like, I need to deal with this person, but I don't actually want to kill them.
It's fair to say it's probably a sword thing beforehand, like a sword fighting thing beforehand.
Weirdly, not so much, because most people who fought with swords would be wearing greaves.
Right.
And so, going for someone's hand is a lot less effectual than either running them through with the sword, jumping on them, pulling out a dagger and getting in the nooks and crannies between their armor, or just flipping your sword around and battering them with the pommel. Particularly traditional medieval European sword fighting, you're not getting someone's hand off is quite a fiddly technique, and there's actually quite a few bones in there. And so you wouldn't really go for that as much. I'm sure there are instances where swordsmen did lose hands, but generally,
probably when a broadsword, not necessarily losing the hand, but a broadsword came down broke the hand.
Yeah, you're more likely to just smash all the bones in someone's hand with a sword than you are to. And again, broken bones in the medieval era, before they knew how to set them properly, were pretty terrifying. You were likely to lose a lot of the usefulness of a limb by breaking all the bones in it.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree, I'm not really sure what era of swordplay the lightsabers are based on. It's very flashy.
I think they take a bit from all over, because I think they incorporate him into the different styles in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
Because the way they start is based on real ones. Obi-Wan's was always the holding over the head with the two fingers pointing. That was his stance.
Very unrealistic.
Yeah, but I think they incorporated this looks kind of cool.
Yeah.
We'll make this. So
I think to a certain degree, what happened in the original trill and then in the prequels defined the way that swordplay looked in movies for a long time.
Yeah, I'd say so. So back to the comics.
Hey.
Yeah, I was going to make points that's the first tangent of this episode, because obviously we're kind of more focused on these different things. But I went on the tangent about the DCEU, so we can't really claim that. But
totally
fewest tangents in an episode potentially. So going through the list and giving some rankings. So Darth Vader, we already put as pretty based, I think. I don't think did we go goated on that beforehand? I don't think so.
The fact that it now has won 2 awards, I think, gets it goated status.
Maybe we elevate it. It was a very fun read. So it's been promoted through winning awards.
Guards. Cringe.
That was a cringe adaptation, yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a shame for me because I adore Terry Pratchett so thoroughly. He did so much for the British novel. I think he did made huge leaps in humanizing and destigmatizing fantasy fiction for a whole generation. And then that adaptation was just a bit piss weak. And the art was all over the place, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And again, I think the undercurrent theme for that whole episode is you were going, Jamie, this bit doesn't make any sense. And I go, yeah, because in the novel, all this other stuff happens. And you were going, oh, well, that would have been really cool. And I'm like, yeah, it was in the book.
Yeah. I think the best part about it was the content and the story, but again, you can't credit that to the adaptation because they've made it worse. So
the one thing that you liked about it were the Sam Vimes quotes.
Yes.
Is that Sam Vimes, the bits where they just lifted something that Vimes said in the book and popped it in a speech bubble or, overlaying a piece of art were really great because they're Terry Pratchett quotes and he's a very quotable writer. But in terms of the way that adaptation was dealt with, I felt really let down by it because I was super excited to do it, wasn't I? I was like, these Terry Pratchett adaptations, they're going to be brilliant. It's Pratchett. He wouldn't have signed off on it if they weren't good. And then they weren't good.
Yes. I think, it's an adaptation. It's the strictest definition of adaptation, so we have to judge it on those merits. And unfortunately, it comes in cringe. The Barbie comics.
Goated. Goated. Totally goated. I mean, fantastic.
I read way more of them than you did.
Yeah, no, they were awful, but they are goated.
Should we say at least based? Because I think based on what they were, the goals they were actually trying to achieve.
Goated.
Put it this way. If we weren't doing it for anything else, it'd probably be cringe. But we've got to judge it on what the actual goal of the comic was. In the same way that Terry Pratchett adaptation, the goal was adapt Terry Pratchett, and it did not do a good job of that. Barbie, the goal was highlighting and advertising the Barbie toys.
Let's be frank here, they're totally cringe. They're awful.
Yeah, they're not. But this is maybe we should go. Should we go mid? Because in terms of what the comic is, but also what it's set out to do, it kind of goes high and low. So I think it middles out at mid.
I think the reason I remember the Barbie episode so fondly is because it's a fantastic episode.
Yeah.
It's one of the few early episodes I would encourage people to go back and listen to, because you and I had so much interesting stuff to say about the Barbie franchise and what it meant culturally, and the origin story for Barbie is fantastically interesting. Real great deep dive into corporate America and the way it works. And so for me, it represents a really fun time in that first year of the podcast of us. It was last summer. We were recording with the sun shining and talking shit about Barbie, right? Like, it was just a fun time for us to be making this podcast.
I was tempting the idea of faking out the Oppenheimer crowd.
Totally. I'm glad you didn't do that.
Yeah.
We would have gotten smoked for it.
We wanted the Barbie attention with how well the film did.
Ashoka, based.
Yeah, we already gave a base, so that's good.
And then Five Nights at Freddy's, cringe as fuck. We already know this.
Rick and Morty, cringe, we already called. And one we haven't talked about yet, the Doctor Who, Once Upon a Time, Lord.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we need to talk about is the fact that we've had Shooty's first episode as the Doctor now.
Yeah. I thought he was a good Doctor. The first episode is a bit cringe in the way Doctor Who episodes can be, especially the first one. So
doesn't it descend into a musical number?
He sings a bit in the middle, but it's because the aliens are singing. So he's
right.
And I think I was hoping for some kind of explanation, because I watched it and I was hoping for some kind of explanation of like, oh, this is how they do it, so I'm doing it too. But they didn't give that explanation.
Yeah.
So it's like, did you just sing along because you felt it? And fair enough. If that's how you're defining this Doctor now, then that's the thing he does. Like, he's a good singer and dancer, so use those tools if you got them, I suppose.
Yeah.
But my issue with the new Doctor is how they introduced him.
How did they introduce him?
So, the whole regeneration thing, we've covered that.
Yeah.
They did this thing where basically
we've covered it.
Yeah. They they created new rules. Now that in itself is fine for Doctor Who. Doctor Who is constantly revising and
regenerating.
and retconning rules and all this kind of stuff. What they did here was instead of David Tennant regenerating into Ncuti Gatwa, what they did was it's called bi-generation. So what it was is the regeneration process caused the new one to be created, but for the old one to still exist.
But why was it David Tennant regenerating into him, not the last Doctor?
So that they haven't explained yet, but they were hinting at it. So there's some connection where, like, because David Tennant's Doctor was like, why am I back and why am I drawn to the companion Donna Noble again.
Yeah.
So they haven't gone into it yet, but there might be like an ongoing story of why this Doctor...
Because the Beeb wanted something good to show at Christmas.
Well, and it was the 60th anniversary. So I think they wanted like a let's get an old one back kind of thing. But the problem for that for me is regeneration of the Doctor Who character. Normally it requires a bit of a gamble. So it's like all in on this new Doctor. He's regenerated or she's regenerated. There's no going back. It's all on the shoulders of this new actor. And I think that's like a bit of a faith in the new actors. Like we're all in on you. Let's go. With this bi-generation angle, I felt it undercut Shui's introduction as the Doctor, because it was like, we've got a new one, but David Tennant's one, he's over here, and he's not going to be in it, but he exists, and we can pull him back if we need him.
If we want to.
And that, to me, felt like a half-hearted introduction to the new Doctor. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's interesting, because the BBC came under a lot of smoke when they hired Peter Capaldi, even though he's a fantastic actor.
And a big Doctor Who fan.
And a huge... I didn't know he was a big Doctor Who fan, but he's a fantastic actor, and I think he was a great, great casting. And then they hired, I don't know her name.
Jodie Whittaker.
They hired Jodie Whittaker. Again, was it Jodie Whittaker?
Yeah.
Right, I've never seen it. I didn't know who she was. Yeah, she's good though.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But they came under a lot of fire for that because she was a woman.
Yeah.
And I can almost picture the fact that there are certain corners of the internet that are angry that the Doctor is a black man now.
Yeah, but they always exist, and who gives a shit, really?
Well, no, who gives a shit about their opinions, but also you can only throw enough poo at something before it is covered in shit, right? And so I do wonder if that was a way of them protecting Ncuti a little bit.
But but again, I think the problem is if you compromise on this kind of stuff, then you lose out both ways.
Because really, they should have stuck two fingers up to the racists and been like, have you not seen fucking Sex Education? Have you not seen how good an actor this guy is?
But the thing is, by hiring him anyway, by making him the new Doctor in any sense, they were going to get it. So there was no point compromising at all. And I don't think it's because of race or anything else. I think, and I might be wrong, but I think it was just this half-eyed, like, people really like David Tennant, so, let's do a thing where he's still around and we can get him. But they already just did a thing where they could get him. They just did this other regeneration. But it really felt like don't worry if you don't like this new Doctor, regardless of what possible prejudices or just criticism of the content and the writing and the story. But regardless of that, don't worry about this new one, because the old one you like is here. And that felt to me like a sitting on the fence, trying to have your cake and eat it too kind of thing. So again, I saw the first episode with Ncuti, and I think he's good. I'm looking forward to seeing what else he does.
Do you know what? The fact that it's him is going to make me watch some of it, because I've not watched Doctor Who for a long, long time. But the fact that it's an actor that I really like and who I really rate and who I think is on his way to doing really huge things is definitely going to make me go, I should probably watch some of that just because Ncuti's in it. Yeah,
it's worth trying for sure. And I'm interested to see where it goes, especially with Russell T Davies back at the helm as well. I do want to correct something from the Doctor Who episode, if anyone listened to that. So there was a lot of discussion about the Whittaker series, the writing being not very good. Like they threw a lot of other stuff at the wall of like, oh, this is wrong now and this has changed and we're doing all this. I attributed that to Stephen Moffat, who does get a lot of flack for doing a lot of weird stuff and not great, show running of the show. But it was a guy called, his surname was Gimble. I can't remember his first name. But
Gimble?
Maybe, I don't know. But he was the one who did the Whittaker series. So he's more to blame for the worst elements of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, little correction, but yeah. So after that Doctor Who tangent, the comic, Once Upon a Time Lord, I was surprised by how good it was.
Yeah, we enjoyed it, didn't we?
Yeah, it was funnier than I thought it was going to be. I surprisingly really empathized with the villains. I can't remember their names, but they were basically like story critics.
Yeah.
And they were like criticizing the story as they went. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. Like, that's us.
It was very meta, wasn't it?
Exactly. So I think easily based.
Oh, totally. I don't think goated.
Yeah, not quite good, but it could have. Like, something else by Dan Slott in this could get to that level.
Yeah, totally. Like, that was the first one, and there's a whole run of them, isn't there? So
yeah, definitely based. And close to the best tie-in.
Do you know what? Yeah, it's between that and Darth Vader.
Yeah, I think Darth Vader edges out because the actual Star Wars comics got a lot more, like, talk when they came out for how good they were.
And let's face it, Vader's cooler than the Doctor.
He is, yeah.
Like, just infinitely cooler. It's Vader, man.
But the Doctor's not meant to be cool. But I see your point exactly. So now on to our final category.
This is the big one.
And it's a few, well, actually, it's a few categories.
Turn.
No, but it's a few categories.
Yeah,
so,
it is, yeah.
So you can see I've put a few in there. If you want to pick one to start off with.
Let's just go with, let's save the big one.
Well, so we'll assign the different categories as we go. So
yeah, so let's start. It's the best and worst comic, and then we've got art, writing, and panel layout. I want to jump in with panel layout.
And these are specifically of 2023 releases.
Yeah. So panel layout is hard because I don't remember the panel layout for a lot of them. The one that really jumps out to me is A Nice House on the Lake.
That had great panel layout, absolutely.
Fantastically laid out, really beautiful. But the other thing is that some of these Marvel ones, I mean, obviously The Amazing Spider-Man cringed for art and panel layout. The thing that I'm thinking of here isn't actually on the list. Is this just stuff that came out in 2023?
This is, yes.
Right, because the one that I was going to say is Superwoman, Supergirl.
Yeah, 2021.
The big splash panels, man.
Yep, they were good.
They definitely would have inched out the art for me.
But if we're talking about big splash panels or splash pages, 8 billion genies.
Well, I was about this. Yeah. So should we just talk about panel layout? I think A Nice House on the Lake gets it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list. I really like the panel layout of Human Target. I think, but it
scanned beautifully, didn't it?
And that is a quintessential Tom King attribute of his comics, is the 3x3, and there wasn't that many 3x3. Well, no, there was, but
he's full of 3x3.
Yes, but he makes great scanning of characters in that, where there's not as much talking, but there's like conversational dialogue and stuff like that.
He does great horizontal thirds as well.
Exactly, yes.
Horizontal thirds, he does really well, and he used that to great effect. You know, when he's first waking up. And we see 3 panels of not much movement, and it's kind of just fantastic, just beautifully laid out. And I
really like the panel layout of Cosmic Detective. I know that one we weren't so high on.
Oh yeah, Cosmic Detective. You know, that was quite well laid out, wasn't it?
And it had some nice art, which coincided with the panel layout.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting with A Nice House on the Lake because it was really well laid out, but it was also quite esoteric in the way it was laid out. It was unusual. It didn't follow the straight Tom King horizontal thirds or the grid layout that we see a lot. It was kind of all over the place, but really effective.
Yeah.
So I think maybe Human Target gets it.
It is between that and Nice House on the Lake.
It is, isn't it?
Nice House on the Lake, I think it did more interesting stuff with the panel layout than Human Target.
Yeah.
Human Target, I think, scanned really well as just reading a story.
Yeah.
Nice House on the Lake actually played with the narration of the story and like the perspectives and who we're talking to, and had a character kind of appearing and disappearing and how they were interacting with them. I think I'm gonna have to give it a Nice House on the Lake. I think it did more creative stuff with it, and I think that kind of earns it the prize.
I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that because I think there's another couple of categories here that it's going to be in high contention for that it maybe won't get.
Yes,
and it deserves something here, doesn't it?
Yeah,
because it was stunning. So I think best laid out comic of the year.
And while
Nice House on the Lake
art kind of goes hand in hand with panel layout, I think the art with Nice House on the Lake was great and interesting. But I think there's other titles here which I think I remember more for being like amazing and like really like memorable. Like Nice House on the Lake, I remember enjoying at the time, but there's no specific panels that I'm like, oh God, remember that. Like, so, and it had those, but I'm just not remembering them now. Great art in Nice House on the Lake, that's the main thing. But
very painterly, great use of color. It was just all around a really great comic book, wasn't it?
The thing with panel layout is, who do we send it to? Because here's the thing with comics, you don't know specifically who's actually laying out the panels.
Yeah, totally.
Because the writer will write some kind of panel layout just to say what happens. It
depends on the specific process, doesn't it?
Exactly. And we know Tom King likes his 3x3s because that's in all of his titles, even though he works with different artists.
Yeah.
So we know that's him full and through. We don't know necessarily, I can't remember off the top of my head who the writer of Nice House on the Lake is and whether is James Tinian the fourth, yes.
Yeah.
And he also did Something's Killing the Children, so the panel layout was quite different in Something's Killing the Children.
Yeah, and the art style was completely different, wasn't it?
So, like, pure speculation, maybe it was more of the artist than the writer in that instance. I think for that one, we're just going to have to put we have to put the writer and artist. It's like, look, whoever did it, panel layout was banging. You've won this award.
You've won the award, yeah.
So
best art.
Yeah, best art. I think that's going to be an interesting one. Human Target, I loved the art in, but I think it's more because I was invested in the story.
So Human Target was great, and I loved that kind of soft toned thing that I had going on. I think when two characters were conversing, it looked great. I think the art was doing a really good job of telling the story. But I do think there is an obvious winner here.
I think you're going to go with 8 Billion Genies.
Yeah. Because remember those splash panels, man?
Yeah, 100%. Before we go further, do we or do we not do worst panel layout? I think the problem with that is after you get good panel layout, you just get serviceable.
It's all bad.
I don't.
Yeah.
Well, not bad, all mid. Like
it's all mid.
At worst of these tiles, I've never looked at one where I was like, where do I look next? Like, I've not, luckily, not had that one that bad. So
yeah, we just kind of go, I didn't scan very well.
Yes.
There was never anywhere it's like, oh, I couldn't get on board with this because of the panel layout.
Yes. So yeah, worst panel layout I think is a mute point. I think it'll be interesting if we ever get one where we go, oh, this was bad panel layout. So yeah, excusing that one. But yeah, so good art, Human Target, absolutely. Public Domain, I thought was an interesting one because that's Chip Zdarsky's own writing, own drawing.
But it's good.
It was very unique. Like, that's the main thing is you can look at that. If ever he does the art for something, it's exactly that. You can pick that out immediately from a lineup.
The actual title itself, goated. Yes. Totally goated. Don't know that the artwork is special enough for it to be the best artwork of the year.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. I was more kind of paying it a bit of like, hey, it was good, but not quite best.
I think the thing with it is that it's competing with a lot of stuff that's a lot less grounded.
Yeah.
It was a very grounded narrative, wasn't it? Because there's no supers, there's nothing shenanigan-y happening.
Cromulent word.
It's a perfectly cromulent word. So there's nothing like that that's happening. And so for something that grounded to have the best artwork, it would need to be like gallery level images for every single panel. And they're good, but they're not that good.
No, it was more of a fun art style than a great art style.
Yeah, and again, I feel that because a lot of that comic book was two people in a room talking, the art wasn't doing a whole lot to push the story along.
Yeah. Good facial expressions, I remember.
Great. Yeah, no, good. Yeah, good quality faces. I mean, face work for me is just very important, apparently. No, it was all very good, and the title itself is incredible. Like, definite contender for best writing of the year or just best overall comic of the year.
And what's great as well is Public Domain just about edges into the 2023 category because the trade paperback of that volume we read came out January 2023.
We need to talk about Do a Powerbomb.
Yes.
Because that looked fantastic.
It absolutely deserves a mention. I loved the art in it.
Yeah.
I am willing... It definitely one of my favorites for the art, but for very, very clear bias. Like, understandable bias.
But it looked good.
Yes. It definitely deserves a mention and very unique style. Like, nothing else really looks like it, which I thought was great. Translating the very live action movement, like chaos of pro wrestling.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think at any point, like you as someone who's not versed in pro wrestling, I don't think at any point you were like, what is this character doing here? Like, the movements, you could tell, like, where characters were flying to or running to or...
Yeah, and I think posing is a big thing in illustration. And something like that that's so reliant on the intricacies of different wrestling moves and the way that the body looks and moves while they're doing those things necessitated really great posing, and it had that. The characters were all very well posed, and, you know, the bodies need to look very realistic, and they did.
The impact as well, like the slamming on the mat, I remember being very good, like very clear, like impact, pain, like this is what's just happened.
I liked Do a Powerbomb a lot more than I was expecting to. And on reflection, it's one of those that stayed with me a bit better than the rest.
Yes.
There's some here that I'm looking at and I'm like, I'm not even really sure I remember this that well. But Do a Powerbomb has stayed with me, and I remember the story beats. At the end, when God turns up, looks fantastic. Really great twist, really interesting.
It's a double one-winged angel. Absolutely insane. Although the technical name I recently discovered for it is it's actually a electric chair driver.
Electric chair driver.
Yeah, but when Kenny Omega does it, it's a one-winged angel.
Of course.
So, yeah. 8 Billion Genies, great art. As I said, very complimentary to the story because it knew when to pull back for the smaller bits, and then it knew when to like go full throttle with the big, crazy, bombastic scenes.
There's this thing that happens to me sometimes where, so they say that the person who doesn't read gets to experience one life, and the person who reads experiences many, right?
Right.
And there are these times when I read a really great book where I feel this weird sense of comfort and also sadness that I don't get to exist in that world anymore. The last time I really remember feeling it was just recently when I finished Stardust by Neil Gaiman.
Right.
Very on brand for the podcast. Beautiful world building. And I kind of went, oh, I don't get to go to that place anymore because I've finished this book. Or at least I don't get to go to that place for the first time anymore.
Yeah.
And that is the way I still have that feeling when I think back to 8 Billion Genies, which is, oh, I don't get to go back to that world again for the first time because I don't get to read this for the first time again. And I think it's the artwork that is really pulling the weight there.
Yeah.
And so just in terms of the effect that artwork had on me and the way I feel about that comic book, like 6 months after we read it?
Yeah.
It's really powerful stuff. So I hold it in really high regard. The splash panels were fantastic.
The constant, the showing the Earth at each stage was like the Earth kept changing like shapes and structure and things like that.
And then the way that they built the expressiveness into the genies.
Yeah. I thought the genies at first were a bit, not hack, but I thought they were a bit oversimplistic for how good everything else was. But then I grew to love that style because the characters of the genies I grew attached to. So that by the end, I was like, I love this design because I've grown fond of just the concept and just, hand in hand with the art. So you just love the art as well. So yeah, it did a lot of great stuff. Looking at the rest of the list, I don't think there's any others that really spike in terms of art. So
there's one more, and I know you don't like this book very much. Like, you didn't like it when we read it. I liked it a bit more than you. But again, I always thought the art was really great. Mosley.
I did like the art. Like, there were scenes where my main issues were with the story and the character motivation. Art I did like. I wouldn't put it maybe as high as the others we're talking about right now. But there were scenes where Mosley was about to fight with some Leviathan monster and the scope looked really imposing.
Yeah.
And him charging forward with his, what was it, magic hammer?
Magic hammer.
That like looked cool because he looked powerful, but he was still small compared to the large monster. But unfortunately, those parts were few and far in between as well. There was a lot of interesting art for sure, but I don't think it was worth a mention. But I definitely think it's low of the good art comics. It was on the lower scope of those.
So what do we think takes the best art then?
I think it's got to be 8 Billion Genies.
Yeah,
I think
I'm totally there with you.
We've spoken about it with such reverence that it kind of needs it, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, totally. And well-deserved. I think this is going to pop up in a couple of the other categories as well, maybe?
Last couple of issues that came out in 2023, 8 Billion Genies.
Worst art.
Worst art, yeah. Well, there's one clear contender for you, I think.
Yeah, John Romita Jr., motherfucker.
Yep. One that I kind of had to be schooled in a bit, I will admit.
And do you know what? Since then, I've taken those panels on my phone that I took photographs of to every artist that I know, and I hang around in some pretty arty circles, don't I? And they've all gone, yeah, that face is looking the wrong way. Yeah, I see what you're seeing, Jamie.
Yeah.
I needed that external validation on that one because I was so far on one side and you were so far on the other. I think it has to take it, mate.
So one thing I just want to say on good art, I think when we overlooked for good art, I think it does deserve a mention, was the neighbors. So I think there was some really interesting, I'm not saying challenging for the title, but at least if we're talking about good art, I think of 2023, the neighbors did have some really interesting art. Like, it was very smooth while being like a bit creepy in parts, and there was very expressive faces. Like that as you say is a difficult thing. So I think the art in The Neighbors deserves at least a mention of it was good art. So just a quick mention there, just in case. Bad art, I'm gonna have to look through the list to compare to The Amazing Spider-Man.
I mean, I think the only thing that gets close has to be The Ones.
The Ones is going to get a real talking to the bit. The thing with The Ones was it was a very simplistic style, which if the story was better, I wouldn't have minded.
The art was a bit mid, wasn't it?
Yes.
So I think the worst art has to be that Spider-Man comic. I'm sorry, John.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you there. Yeah, worst art of 2023 of the comics that we've read.
Yeah.
So,
well done.
Yes. And then,
well done, you.
In terms of comics, so do we separate writing from overall comic?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I haven't put that in the thing, but yeah, so writing, I mean, Human Target has got to be up there in terms of writing for me, obviously.
100%. The writing was fantastic on it.
Public Domain was great writing, but it wasn't kind of as explosive, and it wasn't quite as, like, gripping. Like, it was
Which
fun.
is what probably pitches it up there for me, is it really set it apart from everything else with Red.
Yeah, it was subtle.
Exactly. The writing was so human and nuanced, and the way that the characters interacted was just so beautiful. You really saw that family dynamic start to shine through, and everything that the father had given to his work and wasn't getting back from it was really, like, you know, telling and really powerful.
Yeah.
I think Public Domain was some really powerful stuff.
Yeah. Do a Powerbomb. I think for me, the writing, it was so, like, I'm trying to think of a word of, like, it was just so crazy at points, and that's what I liked about it.
It was well written. I think the burgeoning relationship between the father and his daughter, where she didn't know what was going in and he did, and I thought that was really well handled. I thought the concept of it, like the core concept and the story beats, whilst outlandish, was really good.
The fact that they were able to have the last fight be with God could have been really hack. It could have been really cringe.
But it made sense, didn't it?
They pulled it off.
Yeah, there's nothing cringe about that comic, even though it's, let's be frank here, one of the cringiest art forms coming out of America right now. I know you're a big fan.
It depends who you ask.
I know you're a big fan, but even you have to acknowledge that from the outside, it's a bit...
Pro wrestling's worst is a lot lower than a lot of other mediums' worst.
They managed to create a really nuanced human story, but still having these epic proportions to it.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's the best of the year, though.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. I think it was worth a mention. It was a nomination. Like, if we were just doing the best writing nominations, it would have been in there.
Totally, yeah, which says a lot, considering we're about to talk about Big House on the Lake, or Nice House on the Lake.
Well, should we go in the list, 8 Billion Genies? We have gone into the writing a bit already, because it tied with the story.
Fabulous.
It was a really touching story that was set beautifully against this insane backdrop of a setting.
There's a line with it that's always stuck with me, ever since, where he talks about practice, and he says that learning a skill is a wish that happens over time. Yeah. And I just thought, and I can't remember the exact quote, but that sentiment has really stuck with me, because it's like really feeds into my ethos on life, which is that I can learn how to do anything because I'm tenacious.
Yes. And the whole kind of meta story about the meaning of want and desire, and like how that plays into like this like outlandish setting of what if everyone on Earth got a one wish, and it's one of those settings where like anyone could have taken it in a bunch of different ways, and the way this went with it actually became a kind of meta-analysis on just the subject of wishing and wanting and desire. I think like it did some really great things in that regard. So it's definitely up there. It's like it's got to be neck and neck if it doesn't win. Like that's where I'm placing it. Nice House on the Lake writing was very, very interesting and foreboding, and it was paced really well. I don't think we go like pacing as a full-on category, but it's worth mentioning in writing.
I think what's really interesting about that one is there was an epistolary element to it as well. So a big chunk of the exposition was dealt with through essentially screenshots of emails and stuff throughout the years. Yeah. But they were really well meted out, and I'm a big fan of the epistolary novel. Yeah. I'm a big fan of, like, you know, Dracula's a really great example of an epistolary. It was a really, really popular way to write a novel in the Victorian era. It's kind of died off. And so seeing something this hypermodern with this really great avant-garde art style, fantastically laid out, really great use of visuals in storytelling, to then see it also have these epistolary elements with these really great character motivations, gotta be up there, man.
Yeah, 100%. I thought what was great about it was in the way they did each issue was focused on one character at a time. Yeah. As soon as you got to like the second or third, the technique that was used got across that if there's a character who you've not really like seen much of yet, they're going to get their own issue. So like that immediately tells you if there's more to come, even if it's not given you away. And to do that with the way the story is told, I thought was a great technique in itself as well.
Yeah, totally.
So Nice House, like definitely up there. Human Target we've talked about. It's on there twice for some reason. Well, we might have to put it through then. And yeah, I think in terms of great writing, those are the proper contenders. And It's between 8 Billion Genies and Nice House on the Lake, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I don't know if I can give it to one of them, Ryan.
I know. This is the work. This is the work we signed up for.
This is the work, isn't it? I don't know that I can give it to either of them because they're both so fantastic in different ways.
I think, for me, 8 Billion Genies edges out just a bit, and that's because it made me feel so Nice House on the Lake. We assume there's more to come because, and there might have been more. I haven't checked. There might have been more release. 8 Billion Genies was a 8-issue compact beginning, middle, end,
and I think that might be why it resonated with me so much. Is that I read all of it,
and 8 Billion Genies I think had the better ending of what we read because it was a proper ending, as opposed to Nice House on the Lake might be doing some more stuff, which might be fantastic as well.
Yeah, and I devoured it hungrily. I was hungry for 8 Billion Genies in a way that I'm often not for the stuff we read. Yeah. So I think for that, it just has to take best writing.
On a technicality, it's won best writing, which, I mean, compared to what it was up against, I think that's done really well.
So best overall comic, I think...
do we do worst writing?
Oh, the ones.
The ones. That's a quick one.
That goes without saying.
Yeah.
I think best...
for mentioning why, quip-heavy, Whedon-esque dialogue to a fault.
Yeah, I mean, I think because it's so old, it doesn't get to be there.
Yeah.
And again, you've been saying this the whole time, and I've been advocating for older stuff being in, and now we've gotten here, I'm right on the same page as you, which is like, the older stuff just doesn't get to be there at the moment because
it
there's
had
all
its
these...
time.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, we both adore it, don't we?
Wait, are we still talking about the ones?
No, Why the Last Man?
Oh, I thought we were still talking about the ones. I was like, oh, in terms of writing, yeah, why one of the best written comics of all time, easily. But yeah, the ones, again, the quippiness, it seemed like it was churned out quite quickly. We know Brian Michael Bendis is capable of better things. Yeah. He created better characters that have lasted well after his writing them.
It's a hot mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it was just lazy. Like, that's the main thing. It was lazy. The big fight at the end didn't happen, or they quipped their way out of it, which just sucked.
It's just bollocks.
It's the ones. So yeah, best overall comic. Or should we do worst overall comic first? Was that also the ones? Okay. Yeah.
I think the best overall and worst overall comics are just the best and worst overall writing, if I'm honest with you.
I mean, for us, I think the thing is, we've given 8 Billion Genies the best writing. It was also a close contender for best art. But whereas Nice House on the Lake...
Didn't we give best art to 8 Billion Genies?
We should have memorized this. We
gave best writing and best art to 8 Million Genies.
Yeah, I'll listen back to this if so necessary.
Nice House on the Lake got best panel layout.
Yes, it did.
8 Billion Genies got best art and best writing, which I think by default
it's gonna have to be best overall comic.
It's best overall comic.
For the stuff we were raving about, like that, the writing specifically might have geared us towards those feelings. But then we didn't have those feelings for anything else because they didn't have the best writing either, or as good a writing as 8 Billion Genies. Or
as good art. If it's getting the award for best writing and best art, I think it's then hard to advocate for anything being better than it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I will say personally, I do think Human Target had more of an effect on me than 8 Billion Genies, but it's probably because not only am I obviously a bias for Tom King work, it was also more superhero based. So that's more up my alley.
And if we're being frank here, it was a close contender for best art and best writing alongside Nice House on the Lake and 8 Billion Genies.
Yes. So I think personally, and this isn't the award giving, but personally my favorite was Human Target. But in terms of, I think we have to be a little more objective with the award. I think 8 Billion Genies, being that it didn't have any pre-existing characters like Human Target did, I think it deserves the award for having such an original concept, slightly more original than Human Target, even though Human Target was such an interesting new way of doing a superhero story.
I mean, you know that the very end of Human Target where they're sat on that ice boat on the sea?
Beautiful.
And they're just talking and nothing's really happening anymore. They've kind of worked out the beats of the story. He's still going to die, isn't he?
Yep.
And he has that conversation with this girl that he's built this intense attachment with in probably the darkest moment of his life. And he's really held his shit together through this whole thing. And then you kind of just see under the surface of his emotions.
He admits being scared of dying. And that's informed how he has been his whole life. Like, such a deep moment. But again, 8 Billion Genies has those as well, with Desire and one, like I keep saying.
I think, so maybe it is just Human Target, mate.
I think, again, stepping back a bit, objectively, I think it should go to 8 Billion Genies, even though it was, I still loved it. It wasn't necessarily my personal top favorite, but in terms of giving awards and thinking what was the best of the year, I think 8 Billion G's achieved more than Human Target. And I think I feel like I'm trying to get some kind of credibility as like a reviewer to be like, I'm giving it for these reasons. And I think that is more important than my own personal taste.
Yeah, but again, just thinking back to that last passage of Human Target.
But then also you think that last bit of 8 Billion Genies.
Which was so beautiful.
The
and
last
so
wish
profound.
being made. And the fact that it got to that with more crazy, bombastic, like big panel layouts and superpowers and like dinosaurs. I'm trying to remember things that were in the big splash pads. The earth-changing shape. The fact that it went from all that to then quiet, personal character growth and emotional depth, I think, again, like that's why I think I have to give it to 8 Billion Genies.
No, I think you're right. I think that's a beautifully profound sentiment to end the year out on as well.
But Tom King could easily get it next year. Like,
oh, mate, I mean, fuck me, Supergirl. If we'd have done this in 2021, Supergirl would have been right up there for me, man. I really liked that comic.
So do I. And that's a lesson for anyone listening. If you're thinking of doing something creative, start now just in case you miss out on doing something when you could have. So, but yeah, that is our cheers and cheers for the year. Do we run through this list and give it the rankings? So real quick. Some we've already given.
But we ended on such a beautifully profound moment, Ryan.
Yeah, but that's not like us. Like that's not how the
fine. Let's stick to the structure. Let's do it.
So Miles Morales, Spider-Man mid, Boo Beal, Graduation Day, Fringe, Human Target, Goated, Public Domain, Goated, yeah. Dual Powerbomb, Base to Goated, strong Base
to Goated. It was really good.
The Ones, Cringe.
No, it needs a special subcategory. It's Whedon Cringe.
Whedon-esque, yeah. Too Whedon-esque. 8 Billion Genies, goated, obviously. The top goat, obviously. Amazing Spider-Man, cringe. Nice House on Lake, goated. Mosley,
mid.
I'll give it, even though I have strong issues with it.
It's overall, mid to cringe.
It was mid, yeah. Blue Beetle Graduation Day, cringe, unfortunately. Human Target, again, goated. The Neighbors, mid. Big swing and a miss. Rick and Morty, cringe. Harrower, mid.
Totally
decent mid, yeah. Cosmic Detective, I'd go based.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I enjoyed a lot of it. And Doctor Who, based. Strong based.
Really good.
We've done the rankings. That's how we finish out the year and ring in the new year.
So thank you so much to all of you who have been listening and downloading this and, enjoying it in whatever way you have. Thank you so much.
I would say I'm not interrupting you like I normally do, but I want to also say, in the same sentiment, thank you to everyone who's downloaded, who's streamed, who's listened. Especially because we have started this from basically zero internet presence. We were very lucky, and we need to give a shout to Pocket Casts, who arguably might have given us a boost too early.
Yeah.
But we still benefit from it hugely, and hopefully we'll do more stuff with them again.
Yeah, huge shout out to whoever put us on that list, because it meant, we've not gone into this on the podcast, but when we got onto that list, almost every other podcast on that Geek Speak list on Pocket Casts was made by a big production company. And just scrolling across and seeing all like CBS, HBO, all these huge names, and then the Comic Literate podcast by Ryan and Jamie was massive for me. Just getting to be there with all these huge productions was really amazing.
Specifically, thank you to Emmeline Berry at Pocket Casts. She was the one who at least notified us of being on the list. So
thank you so much, Emmeline Berry. That was massive for us. That was really, really appreciated.
And if we're about done, I've got the little thing to end on, which is
do it.
A quote I found today by one Alan Moore.
Oh, great.
And I thought it was representative of the superhero genre, but also just, stories in general. It's him actually talking about Superman specifically.
Yeah.
And he talking about the appeal of Superman. He said, and this is one of those Alan Moore quotes where I think this is one of the nicer ones for once. He said, talking about Superman, he cannot be a god because gods are dictators who set rules for others to follow. Superman sets rules for himself and uses those rules to our benefit. And I think
much as Alan Moore does.
Much as the mystical Alan Moore who has to restrict his power, his magical power. Yeah, that's the best way to end it on, and we will hopefully see you, or you'll listen to us again in 2024.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening, and good night.
Thank you, goodbye.